right, everybody, welcome to today's SCIP podcast. I'm Sarah Roehl. I am one of the SCIP coordinators for School Community Intervention and Prevention. We are a nonprofit that work with all 6 behavioral regions in Nebraska, and ultimately our goal is to connect more students and families with mental health resources and substance use prevention resources. So part of what we do is have really important conversations, which is what we're doing here on the podcast. Today's podcast is an important conversation about youth suicide prevention, awareness, and advocacy. Please be aware that the conversation today does include suicide and self-harm. We recognize this topic can be difficult, so please take care while listening and know it's okay to pause or step away. If you or someone you know needs support, you can call or text 988, the Suicide Crisis Hotline, and that is available 24/7. We are so grateful to be joined by Dr. Chad Duval today, an emergency medicine physician here in Lincoln, Nebraska. In 2023, Dr. Duval and his family lost their son, Will. In the time since, they've turned their grief into advocacy through their nonprofit, Where There's a Will. This conversation today is especially for parents, educators, and caregivers, people who want to better understand how to support the young people in their lives. Today we'll talk about recognizing changes, starting conversations, and what prevention can look like in real everyday moments. Chad, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So the first thing that I want to talk about is I would really love our viewers to get to know Will a little bit. So when visiting the website of Where There's a Will, which is your nonprofit, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later so people can know where to find you and look up more information. But we get kind of a snippet of Will when you describe his kindness and his humor. What else made Will very special?
So Will was just a great kid. He was a super deep thinker, and he just had a different way of looking at the world. He was super curious. He was witty and creative and always was the life of the party. He was just kind to everybody, and he had tons of friends. He could make friends with anybody. I remember one time as a freshman in high school, he came home and was telling me about this person that he met, and we realized it was the starting quarterback at East High School, and he had no idea. He didn't care. It was just somebody that he liked and he made a friend with that day. That was Will. He gave the best hugs. He was always worried about everybody else, often more than himself. And sometimes I think that some of the things that made him so lovable and unique, I think caused him to struggle with being different. And because he was different than our other kids, but in a very special way that we all embraced and we all saw how great it was, but I don't know that Will always did.
Like when I think of my own kids and who I really hope that they become friends with, who kind of embrace them in their lives, it is friends and people just like Will. And truly, you talk a lot about his acceptance and how important it was for him to be friends with everybody, and I think make a point to make everybody feel important for exactly who they are, and that advocacy and the way that you still talk about Will and the work you guys are doing in your organization. This is truly Will's legacy.
You know, our theme for our foundation is be kind to all kinds, and that really was Will. He really was. He had friends from all backgrounds, ethnicities. He was a special kid in that way.
So if you're comfortable sharing, what were some of the changes to Will's behavior or routine that maybe felt clearer now than they did at the time?
So from a very young age, Will did suffer from anxiety. And as much as he was all the things that we just described, he sometimes really struggled with that. But after COVID, things got a lot worse. He started isolating himself more. He still had a lot of friends and still did things, but just in a different way. At times, like, we would go on trips to Disney World or whatever, and he just, which was very abnormal, didn't want to go, and even when we were there, was super anxious the entire time. one of the big things that, in looking back, I mean, we noticed it at the time, but he really started getting restrictive about what he was eating. He lost a ton of weight. He had been a great eater, but he started eating less and less, and it was a struggle to get him to eat anything. And he started also having some OCD behaviors, excessive hand washing, some of those things that, looking back, you know, we knew it at the time, but didn't realize quite how bad it was. Then, towards the end, he did have some self-harm behaviors. He had a few incidents of cutting. And again, you know, we reacted. We tried to get him help. We had discussions with him and didn't get mad at him about it, but it was something that he couldn't control. And looking back, you know, I didn't understand how overwhelming his anxiety and things had grown. So.
Well, and that kind of leads to the next thing. It's sometimes hard, I think, to distinguish between what is the maybe normal level of anxiety and ways in which teenagers are showing us that they're worried about something or they're having these overwhelming emotions, and then something that is more serious. And it's, I think, hard for parents to identify that. And like you said, I realize, you know, unless you're there and you have lived it yourself, like, you don't get it. Mm-hmm. So do you feel like there were some things that, you know, as you look back, that you really did kind of think, well, maybe this is just kind of the normal healthy anxiety that a teenager goes through?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it was a strange time there for all these kids that came out of COVID. You know, a lot of them that had been in middle school or late in elementary school, early high school. You know, that was the time that they were supposed to be interacting with friends and figuring out how to develop relationships and stuff, and they all got isolated. And not just in our emergency department, but across the country, there was just this huge surge in pediatric and youth mental health, and there were no beds, and it was a huge problem across the country. And then, you know, with Will, you're right. What was normal and what wasn't. They've got hormones raging. They just came out of COVID. You know, there's this whole social media thing that, as a parent, we didn't quite understand because obviously we didn't grow up with that. There's tons of negativity. There's a constant news stream of negative things coming out. And it was difficult to know what exactly was normal and what wasn't. And I think that's the thing that I've come to realize more than anything else, is that we talk a lot about depression, but we don't talk enough about anxiety, or we don't understand it, because we all have a certain level of anxiety, but the anxiety that these kids and Will was experiencing is something that is completely overwhelming, that they don't know how to cope with and don't know how to explain completely. And it's something that I just didn't have a great appreciation for until, obviously, it was probably too late. So I think that's, you know, it was really hard to know what was normal and what wasn't at the time.
Do you think there were things that could look like positive ways of coping, you know, or some of those kind of masked internal ways of coping with anxiety that they could still be kind of a signal for distress?
Yeah, I think so. I think, you know, a lot of kids are pretty good at masking their feelings, especially to their parents and teachers. I think there are kids that, you know, in order to deal with their anxiety, they just keep getting involved in more and more and doing more and more. You know, for Will, while he was struggling himself, he was so worried about his friends, and he was going to his counselors constantly and discussing them, but he never dealt with his own feelings. And I think that was a way of him masking what he was feeling. So it looked like a positive to us. You know, he's interacting with the counselor and everything, but in the end, it probably was a way that he was kind of coping with it.
I want you to touch on, because something that you have on your website for parents, and I was able to learn a lot from you in our previous conversation about this, but I don't think a lot of families know a ton about it. I would love for you to share with us. So something that's really important to you and your family too is PANS, and kind of bringing awareness and helping families understand what PANS is. So for those of us that don't know, can you kind of help us understand what is important about PANS?
Sure. So PANS stands for Pediatric Acute Neuropsychiatric Syndrome. And so we still have a ton to learn about this disorder. But what we do know is it's not necessarily a behavioral issue. It's more of a neuroimmune disorder, where essentially a person's immune system is kind of overreacting and causing inflammation to their brain. And these kids, individuals that develop this, display some really bizarre behavior. They suddenly have OCD behaviors. They have anorexia or eating disorders and extreme impulsivity. Their anxiety can ramp up significantly. And the thing is it's like these kids' brains are on fire, but unfortunately there's not really a test for it. And so it comes down to a clinical diagnosis, and meaning that somebody has to suspect it. And oftentimes, because the medical field, we don't really know that much about it yet, that there's a reluctance to adopt it or to accept that this could be what's going on with this child. And that makes it difficult. But the key to PANS or PANDAS, which is specifically caused by strep, is that it usually comes on after some kind of trigger, such as a virus like COVID or influenza. In PANDAS case, it's strep, or it could be another virus, or even potentially mold or some kind of environmental allergy that could trigger it. But it's often after that is when you start seeing these symptoms. And just as of note, part of the reason that we have gotten so interested in this and become involved in this is that Will had been sick with influenza just before this happened and really started displaying some strange behaviors in the few days to weeks up to the end. And so that's kind of where we got involved, and my wife is super heavily involved in this. And it's one of those diagnoses, again, that we don't know a ton about. So often these kids come in with these strange behaviors, and they get kind of pushed into the whole mental health, behavioral health realm, and they end up getting put on multiple psychiatric drugs and things, when come to find out that's probably not what's going on. And so it's a very difficult thing to diagnose, and we need to learn a lot more about it, but slowly but surely we're getting there.
Would then it be different if if family would bring their child in and this was the response, from the doctor, like to prescribe maybe a psych medicine or something? Would that then show more negative side effects if it were to be something like PANS?
No, not necessarily. Okay. It just may not have the effect that they expected.
Okay.
Or it may be just that it is kind of masking the underlying issue.
Okay.
But it wouldn't really, I don't know that it would make it necessarily worse.
So what I'm hearing you say, though, is if a family maybe is thinking, like, this could possibly be something that's impacting my children, they really need to bring it to the attention of their doctor.
Yes, absolutely. And again, it's still a fairly new thing, and there's still a lot of unknown. So there is some skepticism in the medical field. Mm-hmm. Now, the American Academy of Pediatrics has just come out with a recent paper about it, and so I think it's gathering steam. Of note, just here in the last week or so, our legislature passed a bill requiring insurance companies to pay for the treatment and things. And so,
Which was huge.
Yes, that is
Huge
it's
win.
a huge win. And so, when things like that happen, it will start the ball rolling, hopefully, so that more kids are at least getting tested. They may not have it, but at least it's being considered.
Yeah. In addition to what you've already mentioned, talking about PANS, what other signs or changes might families or educators even watch for in young people who may be struggling with a mental health concern?
Well, I think with any of them, when there's an acute change, that's the biggest thing. But anytime that they see somebody having maybe worsening anxiety, suddenly making poor decisions, maybe they're displaying some kind of OCD symptom or increased impulsivity, all those things should be concerning that maybe we need to check this out.
And as you say that, specifically the super impulsive behavior, that kind of takes me to a question over here, the differences in how suicidal thoughts can show up in the different age groups and communities. I felt like you pointed out something really important that I don't know if we all really think about often when it comes to the impulsivity of kids.
Yeah, I think, that's the thing. One big difference between maybe adults and children is, I think kids are much more spontaneous. They're much more likely to act. And a lot of adults deal with anxiety as well. But oftentimes when they have more of a plan, they, understand these things. But kids, they don't see a way out, I think, and they just act. I recently listened to a speaker who was talking about this, and they've found that most people who, including kids, who end up actually committing the act of suicide, or they make that decision within 10 minutes. It's not like a prolonged thing that they have set out there and planned. It's sudden, it's spontaneous, and they do it.
And I think that comes into the next point then. What would you consider kind of a don't wait moment for parents or adults?
Yeah, I think anytime that you have a serious concern, or you see a abrupt, significant change in behavior, you see your child really struggling with, especially anxiety, I think you need to act right away. I mean, there may be consequences of overreacting, but they're far less than what we had to deal with.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. What are some of the biggest misconceptions or misunderstandings that people have about youth suicide?
So I think there's some people out there that think, oh, well, this is just attention-seeking behavior. I think, or they may think, well, these kids just made a bad decision, or they're a bad kid, and that's not the case. Most of these kids, for some reason, are just overwhelmed. They can't cope, and I don't think they think about the repercussions at all. That just doesn't enter in their mind, and they don't have time to think about the what ifs. I think there's also a misconception out there, and this has been studied, but people think it's contagious, or if one person does that, it's going to happen to somebody else, and that has never been shown to be true. I think also people are really quick to blame the parents or friends or something, but the truth is often there's no one person or one thing that caused it, and no one is immune. I mean, kids come from all socioeconomic, cultural, ethnic backgrounds. They all struggle, and they all have problems. So, in our instance with Will, he had seen counselors, he'd been to a psychiatrist, he was going to the counselor at school. We had taken all kinds of precautions to keep him safe. And in the end, it just wasn't enough.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
You touched a little on the beginning, social media, and kind of how that kind of began bombarding kids more during COVID. And obviously we have just seen that increase, I think, each year too. But how do you think social media platforms are impacting youth mental health. And there could be, this could be both a positive and a negative impact.
I think on the positive side, it does allow them to find their community. They can find other kids or a group that have similar thoughts, similar interests, and often it's easier for them to be candid on some of these platforms about their feelings and things. On the other side, the negative side, is that obviously people say horrible things on these social platforms. And then, there's cyberbullying, there's sextortion. Kids and adults both are developing body image issues. I think, there was the recent lawsuit against Facebook showed how addictive this can be. And I think the overwhelming feeling of the FOMO that these kids feel just makes their anxiety 10 times worse.
Yeah. It's interesting when I talk to middle schoolers and I say FOMO, even some of them start to look at me like they don't know what that means. I'm like, oh, is that a term that was more when, when I was in school? But then when I tell them what it means, they're like, oh my gosh, yeah. Because even when they're checked out or not on their phone, they're constantly feeling the buzz of, the repetitive notifications. And
Yes.
then, they know next time they look at it, there's going to be 30 unread messages in this group chat. And, it completely takes their focus and attention away from anything else, that they're doing.
Right.
And then until they can access it and read it and get that dopamine hit from being able to read the messages or whatever, it does. It's making even, being able to withstand just the normal mundane parts of life less doable.
Absolutely. Completely agree.
But yes, the recent lawsuits, I feel like that's also a start too. I mean, I know hundreds more that are that have been filed, but I think that was a good start.
Yeah.
To helping us.
Yeah. I think Pandora's box is open,
Yes.
but at least people are aware of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. So what would you say to an adult who is worried about a child but isn't sure if it is serious enough to act on or to do anything yet?
I think if you have any concerns, don't wait. You need to act right away. I mean, at least have a conversation with your child. Mm-hmm. If obviously you need immediate services, call 988, the Suicide Crisis Hotline, or talk to your counselors or to their pediatrician. But I think it's always better to be safe than sorry.
Mm-hmm. And can you touch a little bit on, because I know you're a part of the work that part of the health department has been doing with some of the pediatricians here in our local area, kind of helping them create a system of how they assess suicidal ideation in kids, and then kind of having a process, I guess, that everybody can kind of follow. If that seems to be something that has come up in like a general well check or an appointment at your family doctor?
Yeah. The Lancaster County Health Department and a lot of the pediatricians and some of the family practice docs in town have come together to kind of have a more streamlined process of evaluating these kids. They're all kind of using a similar questionnaire, and then with the help of Brian, having a very streamlined way of getting these kids in to be assessed and get help if they need to. And so I think it's going to really help the community. And, a lot of times the pediatricians are the first contact. And these kids may not have counselors or psychiatrists already. And so hopefully the pediatrician or the family practice doc can get them on the right path to getting some help.
And I think too, it is breaking the stigma of mental health isn't a part of health, it is a part now of the conversation with your family
Absolutely.
Practitioner,
Yep.
This is a part of the assessment that is so
Right.
important for everybody.
Yep.
What advice would you give to parents if they feel unsure how to start that conversation about mental health with their kids? Like if they're just super uncomfortable or maybe they've tried and they've just gotten shut down right away, like, no, I'm fine, like, leave me alone. And they still just have like that gut feeling something's wrong, and I just don't know how to get them to talk to me or open up to me.
I think the first attempt is to sit down and just have a conversation, not in an angry or accusatory way, but, just a caring, thoughtful, I'm concerned. And then if they don't feel comfortable talking to you, maybe giving them some suggestions, giving them some options, whether it is a pediatrician or somebody with potentially the Hope Squad or their school counselor, finding somebody else that maybe they would feel more comfortable talking to about this. But I think it's a fine line between pushing too hard and getting, and having that backfire on you. But I think they have to find somebody they're comfortable opening up to.
And I appreciate you saying that, because that's hard as a parent to feel like you're not the one they're choosing to talk to. But I really do think that's true for so many kids, that sometimes there are just certain things that, for whatever reason, because they don't want to worry or stress you out, or because they probably are anticipating what your immediate response is going to be, and maybe that in that moment's keeping them from, I know I've experienced that with my oldest for sure. And so I think knowing as a parent, like, it is 100% okay to give them other options of trusted adults that they can share this with first, that you can then collaborate with and join in on that conversation to figure out how then, you can support from both, from, full circle.
Yep.
So for educators who see, many students every day, what are some small but meaningful ways that they can notice and support a student who might be struggling?
So, I think obviously they're busy and they have a lot of students. And so while I would love to say that they should touch base with every kid every day, it's probably not completely possible. But I think you really need to keep an eye out for changes in behaviors. And if you see something that's just maybe a little bit different, just ask them how they're doing, if they need any help and those kinds of things. I have a cousin in Omaha who's a teacher, or just outside Omaha, and he recently shared a story with me about a student of his that he had a feeling something was going on, and just pulled him aside one day and said, "Hey, what's going on? Are you okay? Everything?" And they opened up a little bit to him, and then later came back to him and basically said, "Listen, you saved me that day, because I was really struggling." So it can have a big effect.
And I think that's so important for people to hear. You don't have to have this big pre-planned speech, prepared ahead of time. Sometimes it's just simply acknowledging that you see them, and I notice a difference, like just checking in on you.
Yeah, I think if you show that you care, hopefully when they are struggling, then they'll come back to you and trust you, and to help them get through it and open up to you.
How important is early mental health education, and what do you think that should look like? I know you and your wife, Sherry, that's part, I think, of some of the passion and goals in your nonprofit, is that earlier elementary school, prevention education. So tell us a little bit more about that.
So yeah, I think that is something that our foundation we would like to focus more on. And I think, we really need to stress the importance of mental health, not only to the kids, but to the parents of these young children. Many of these issues start early, and the sooner they're addressed, the better, and making these kids comfortable just talking about their emotions and feelings. If they have never had the conversation, they don't know how to explain it, they don't know what it's called, they're going to have more trouble talking about it and letting somebody know that they're not feeling well. So sometimes just giving a name to these things and explaining what they are can help these kids. And so I really think it's important that we start having these conversations early on in elementary school.
And what is your take on even, I have, depending on kind of where you are throughout Nebraska, I've, visited with different districts, and, for whatever reason, some will say suicide and define it for kids, and some want to talk about it but kind of baby step around the term, thinking that is like, what are your thoughts on
it's
that?
a tough subject because I probably would have been a little reluctant to have that discussion as well when my kids were young. I just wouldn't have wanted to expose them, but in hindsight, I think it's a fine line between going overboard and at least kind of introducing the concept. And maybe you don't have to call it what it is, but at least they would know that, this is what it is and this is how people get there, and it's okay to talk about. And if you're having these thoughts, that you really need to talk to somebody.
Yeah. And asking for help too, teaching kids it's normal and encouraged, to ask for help.
Yep, absolutely.
So are there changes you'd like to see in how mental health is addressed in our community?
Absolutely. I'd love to see more resources for all those that are struggling, both youth and adults. Making access to mental health providers easier and more affordable would be a huge step. Also, just raising awareness and making it okay to talk about mental health. There's just such a huge negative stigma surrounding mental health, and it really prevents a lot of people from seeking help. I'm not sure if I personally know anyone who doesn't either know someone or doesn't have mental health problems themselves. I mean, it's way more prevalent than I think most people think. And we just don't talk about it in the same way that we talk about diabetes and hypertension and heart disease. And, as you mentioned in one of our big sayings within our foundation, is that mental health is health. And it's just as important as our physical health and affects our physical health. That's one of the purposes of our upcoming walk in this May of 2026, is that we want people to come out and just know that it's okay to talk about, and to get rid of that stigma. A few years ago when my son was in high school, we kind of helped with the Hope Squad. They sponsored a football game, and it was Sack the Stigma was the name. And then we also have an event in January that's called Skate Away the Stigma. And so it's a huge problem with, people, because there's just such a negative connotation to it.
What does, I'm going to kind of shift to you and kind of your experience. What does helpful support look like for a grieving parent? And specifically, what should other people know when trying to support a grieving parent, as far as, maybe what to say and what not to say?
So first of all, I hope no one listening ever has to go through what we have gone through and are still struggling with. As much as I've seen in my career as an emergency physician, losing a child is a trauma I couldn't possibly have imagined. And so that has made it really hard sometimes to seek support when you know that a lot of those people who are offering it can't even imagine what you're experiencing and have never been through it. That being said, the LOSS team came out and they talked to my family, and I thought that was really helpful. They all had similar experiences and kind of talked us through it a little bit. A lot of people reached out to us at the time. It's just we couldn't talk about it at the time, and it was so painful to think about, to talk about. The thoughts are just overwhelming, and they don't really ever go away. And as time goes by, it does get easier, but it's not something that's ever out of my mind for very long. And so it's always difficult to talk about. But I think one of the hardest things to hear, especially right away after this, was people would be like, "How are you?" And I wanted to say so bad, "I'm horrible. How do you think I am?" And it's just it's something we ask all the time. It's just it's almost a greeting that we have. But I think a better way to approach that would be something like, I've been thinking about you and your family. Is there anything I can do to help? I think that's a better approach. Then the other thing is, and I even caught myself a little bit ago saying it, it's just something we always say, and it's a very small thing, but it has a huge impact, is that we always say committed suicide. And it's really, really hard to hear that word committed for those of us who experience this. You know, we don't talk about somebody who has drug abuse as they committed drug abuse, or they committed cancer, or they committed heart disease, or committed alcoholism if they, die from that. And, there's a lot of negative, again, connotation around that, and it really, really hurts when you hear that word. So we're trying to get people to say that they've died by suicide instead. And I know it seems like a really little thing, but for those of us who experience this, it's really a huge deal, and it can really affect you when you hear that.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, because that's, I think, important, and what I'm hoping other people hear too, as we figure out how we can support our community when these things happen. You think of, when we say, like you said, I think when you see somebody that you either, maybe you know them, maybe you don't, and you just like automatically ask, how are you? And I think with that, you automatically assume that they're going to say, good, or I'm fine. I know I've said that when I'm not. So I think it's such in this experience of when the obvious was, no, I'm not fine. And even in just everyday life, I think getting out of the habit of that even being the question that we ask people. Mm-hmm. But, like, hey, is there something I can do for you today, or something that you need?
It's a hard habit to break.
It is,
and I've even caught myself doing it in some of these situations, even though I know that's not what I should be asking.
Yeah.
So it's a tough thing, but when you really think about it, do you really want to know the answer?
Right. Yeah. Or do you know how to respond? If I tell you I'm not okay, then what?
Right.
Like, what are you going to say? Yeah. So you touched on a little bit about this already when you talked about the LOST team. And for those people in our community that don't know a ton about the LOST team, can you touch a little bit on what that is?
So they're a group of volunteers who have suffered a similar loss. And they literally came out the night of this happened, and they just talked to us. And wasn't formal or high pressure or anything like that. It was just, we had questions, and they just kind of described their situation and how they felt, and everybody handles it differently. And so it was a little bit helpful just at the time to know that somebody else knows what you're feeling. I think was the biggest thing. And maybe a little bit to kind of know what to expect next, even though for everybody it's different. So
yeah. What other resources or support systems made a difference for you and your family?
So we tried to go to the Morning Hope, which is another organization who helps people with not just loss from suicide, but loss of a loved one from whatever reason. And at the time, we just weren't quite ready. I think it was too early. We were at too many different places as far as the individuals in my family, and I think they're a great organization. It just didn't work for us, but I think for others that it would be a really good thing to do. Obviously my family and friends were great. I had a ton of friends that came in from out of town to support us. They set up a meal train for us because we literally could not function for several weeks after this happened. And so that was really huge. And then eventually we all kind of individually were going to therapy, to counseling. And eventually, we were struggling with the fact that not everybody was on the same level of grief. And obviously Mom and Dad were struggling in a different way than my kids were. And so we actually went to a family counselor where we kind of all just kind of talked about that. And she really helped us kind of understand it's okay that we're not all in the same spot and that we're going to have to adjust because, it's different for a parent than a sibling. And I thought that was super, super helpful in helping us kind of deal with that whole situation.
What resources would you want every parent or educator to know about?
Well, first and foremost, it's 988, the suicide hotline, crisis hotline. That's, in the immediate setting, that's a huge one. Bryan Mental Health, and then now Children's has a whole new mental health facility in Omaha that is really awesome. And then, we just talked about the pediatricians and family practice docs in Lincoln that have come together to streamline this mental health process. And then there's, of course, your counselors at school. There's the SCIP program. And then Lancaster County has a really good website about the 6 pillars of emotional well-being that they've developed. There's other organizations in town that are developing. There's the Hope Squads at schools. And so there are a lot of resources. You just kind of have to take advantage of them. As far as Pans and Pandas goes, there is a group called Aspire. And then also there's the Pans and Pandas Network for those looking for resources on those things, and you can go to our website to find a lot of those resources.
So how can listeners support youth mental health initiatives? Sometimes as a parent or teacher or just a community member, when, we hear these things and we want to do something, but we don't quite know where to start or what to do or how we can be helpful. So what are some things that our listeners can do to get involved in youth mental health?
Yeah, I think, obviously you can make donations to many of these nonprofit organizations, and that's all great. But I think even more important is just showing up to these events, knowing that it's okay, again, to talk about, showing your support, raising awareness, and hopefully in doing so, reducing that stigma that we talked about. I think it's also, if you go to some of these events, it's a great way for families to kind of start having that conversation about mental health and things. And so really, I think just donating your time, and if you want to volunteer or things, that's great. But sometimes it's just a matter of being seen, being seen at these events and knowing that, hey, there is support out there for these people that are struggling, I think is huge.
Yeah. And like you said this, like just showing up and being there, then what a greater way to connect with other families that are
for sure
probably wanting to be involved or wanting to get connected to someone that's having a similar experience to them, but, didn't really know where to go or where to find somebody maybe. So I think that's just a great opportunity for connection too.
Yep. Completely agree.
So that kind of gets us to where I would love for you to tell us about your nonprofit, Where There's a Will, and how listeners can get involved.
So yeah, we're still kind of in infancy. We've only been doing this for a couple years. So our goal is to obviously raise awareness, and we have a couple events. We have a event coming up here in May. It's completely free. It's at Holmes Park. It's just an awareness event. We will have some activities there. We'll walk around the lake. We're going to have some treats there as well. But just a time to come out and show support for mental health in general. And again, just raising awareness. It's okay to talk about. That's coming up in May. In June, we're going to have we're in conjunction with Brian, we're having a speaker come in and do a webinar about PANS. We'll also be helping Brian sponsor some speakers coming up in September and October. Tom Arnold is coming to talk about substance abuse in September. And then Amanda Beard, former Olympic swimmer, will be coming to speak at the Bryan Mental Health Fair at St. Mark's in October. And then in January, the next one will be in January 2027. We have an event called Skate Away the Stigma. where we have an ice skating event. Will loved to ice skate and skated the day before he passed. And so we do that kind of in his honor. And then also we have sponsored a scholarship for seniors who have lost somebody important to them. And this will be our second year of awarding that.
And how do folks sign up to attend these events?
They're on Brian's website and things. There will be, I'm sure there'll be social media out. And most of the time, these are free events and just show up. We're trying to help look for other ways to support others in the community and do more. We want to work with LPS and the Hope Squads. That's really important to us, and really whatever we can do. And so we're up for suggestions, and we're trying to make ourselves more visible. Again, we have resources on our website, but we're constantly looking for more ways to be helpful in the community and do more for the mental health community.
So if someone's listening and is like, oh, we would really love for you to come and be a part of an event that someone else is having, is there a phone number or email they can reach you at, or what's the best way?
There's an email on our website that they can go to, and so that would probably be the best way to get a hold of us.
Okay. And can you tell us what the website is to get to you?
Yeah, it's www.wherethere'sawillfoundation.org.
And I know when you Google, I think the very, very first time I found it, I just Googled where there's a will, and it's the first one that pops up too. So
that's good. My daughter does all of that, and she's super passionate about it.
Yeah. And she's super good at it, and super creative, and her videos are great that she posts.
Yes.
The new one about the lawn
the
signs. Yes. Tell us, we're kind of coming to a closing, and I'd love this to be kind of some of the last things we talk about. I'd really love to bring it back to Will. You shared with me before, how he was just a lover of all animals, and you shared something about the logo of Where There's a Will and kind of how that came about.
So Will loved all animals, but he was scared to death, actually, of squirrels. But even though he was scared of them, he loved them. He talked about them, and so it was kind of the anxiety that it caused him was kind of that was the impetus behind making that our character that we went with. And it's kind of a funny, we all laugh about it, that he was scared about him, but every time we see one, we think of him. Yeah, I love that. Well, before we close today, I do want to thank you, Chad, again for your honesty and willingness to share Will's story and your family's story. These conversations are hard, but they're so important. And if you're a parent or educator listening, one of the most important takeaways is this. You don't need to have perfect words to make a difference. Paying attention, checking in, and creating space for those honest conversations can go a long way with kids. If something feels off with a young person in your life, please reach out to your doctor, your school, or someone that you trust. No one has to navigate this alone, nor should anyone have to. If this episode resonated with you, please consider sharing it with someone in your community. These conversations help reduce stigma and make it easier for young people to feel seen and supported. And again, if you or someone you know needs immediate support, you can call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, which is available 24/7. Thank you for listening, and take care.